ex officio.
So then is it 4 or 5?
That's 4.
Oh, okay.
Still 4.
Yeah, I think we can go ahead and start. Okay. All right, good morning. This is.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning. This is Transportation Subcommittee number 4. We'll call this to order. Took us a little while to find a date that suited everyone's schedule. Fortunately, we have just a limited schedule of bills, 2 bills that were late. We wanted to make sure we scheduled this at a time where everybody had the opportunity for a full hearing. It's my understanding that we may have more members joining us later. Of course, everyone this year is running between committees, presenting bills and whatnot, but 4 members is a quorum, and so we're going to begin. Of the 2 bills that are on the agenda, one of them is House Bill 2025, and the patron is Delegate Tran, who I understand is running a little bit behind. So I'm going to call the other bill, House Bill 1843, that's Delegate Lawson. If you come forward, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 1843 is about a 4-year journey, 5-year journey I've been on. And first year I went to a study at DMD, stakeholders, state police, trial lawyers, insurance, everyone was included. And what came out of it was the bill I had basically last year, a year before. The question had always been, it wasn't that this bill would make the roads safer, which studies have proven that it will. Insurance rates go up when someone has a real driver's privilege card. All those have been proven. In fact, Kathy's got all those statistics, and that's why I wanted her to really go first in this. My bill actually this year, because the blowback on my bill was, how do we know these people are who they say they are? And that's the crux of the problem I've run into for 2 years. In negotiations with...
Well, and Delegate Loxam, just for the benefit of everyone, I'm not sure all those present are exactly what your bill does. So maybe start with that.
Yes, sir.
What is the idea? What are you getting to, and how does it do it?
There is a list of 14 legal presence immigrants in the community right there that cannot get driver's license. They're legally in the state. But there are also people that are probably illegally in the state that live here and work here. They're in our communities now. We really don't know who they are. So what this bill will do is give them the opportunity to get a driver's privilege card. Of course, they'd have to go through the same thing, the same process that we would to get a driver's license. It's the same process. They would have to pass the test, vision test, knowledge road test. They'd have to do all of that. So all of that is no different. And when you go through the bill, any place where there is a lines that have changed, basically that is to protect the driver's license validity for voting, for ID, and those things. So the bill, there's a lot of different languages in here where that's changed, and that's basically to protect the driver's license that a citizen holds. If you go to page 27, that's where the real income and requirements to get a driver's privilege card comes in. Okay. In order to get a driver's privilege card, you have to prove residence, you have to prove income, paying income tax into Virginia, and you have to have a passport. So the question that's been for the last 3 years of how do I know who these people say they are is with a valid passport. If you look at a passport, because I had people say, well, how do we know they're real? It's this document here that's signed with the federal government with all these countries back here, 173 of them I think it is, that have all agreed to what a passport is or is not. So, in essence, and let me take one step back. The biggest difference between my bill and Delegate Tran's bill, one major difference is the cost. In fact, I think I have a line amendment to make sure that the cost lines up with what I wanted it to be. That-
Mr. Chairman, I have a line amendment about the
The
copy.
cost. Okay, the line amendment on the cost needs to be 200 and 100.
Okay.
Is there a line amendment you'd like to have moved?
Yes, sir.
All right, clerk will move the line amendment.
Mr. Chairman, on line 1347, I'm sorry, 1348.
Okay.
After the word "be," strike, and don't it blocks them with 100 and 200?
It's gonna be, yes, it's gonna be strike the 100, put 200 in, and then on renewal, it should be 100.
Okay.
I got a different.
I got it different, I'm sorry.
I've got it on 1648.
1648,
Oh.
after the word "be,"
Wait a second, because we're at 13.
I apologize.
No, you're good. All right, Kath, go ahead.
1648, after the word "be," strike $100, insert $200. And again on line 1650, after the words "fee of," strike $50, insert $100.
All right, is there a motion to accept the amendment?
So moved. Second.
Second, any opposition, seeing none, be adopted.
All right, and the amendment, basically the amendment does, it's gonna probably raise an additional, and DMV can speak to the amount of money, but it's gonna be $30 or $40 million on the plus side. And the reason I put the bill different than Delegate Trans is, these are non-citizens. There's absolutely no reason for DMV to do a service at cost, similar to out-of-state tuition. There's absolutely no reason for the state to subsidize the program for non-citizens, or a non-resident, or an out-of-state resident in the view of our state colleges. So that's where that amendment comes from. That was actually talked about this summer with the immigrant community. They actually brought to me the passport idea. They said that would be a form of ID that they could use. I think if you talk to any lawyer or anybody that work in the court system, they see this as an issue of trying to figure out who these people are. So at this point, you also need to understand that if they are registered with DMV, and there is an issue that the federal government needs to find them, they can petition DMV and find them where they work or where they live. In a sense, I'm documenting undocumented people, and they're paying me $200 to do it. Another issue that we've tried to cross the hurdle of is you're gonna give an immigrant government ID, and it could be confused with our driver's license. Well, I've got a copy of a mock-up, so just so you understand the differences. So this is just a standard ID, or driver's license. This is what DMV would think they could do with, so we've got a different shade. Clearly states on top it's a privilege card. Clearly states that it's not for use for federal ID purposes. In effect, it is who they say it is because we've got a passport backing it up. Now, will this take care of all immigrants? No. If they don't have a passport, they're not going to be able to get this. And I've got an immigration lawyer to explain the different scenarios where that might be a case. But I think a small bite of the apple is better than biting the whole thing. I need a passport. I need a passport to verify who they are. So that's in essence of my bill. I think it's good for public safety. And I think it's good to find out who's in your community, and they're gonna pay me to do it. So I have people in the audience. I actually told them not to pack the room, which I think in the Senate you could see that they could. I didn't see any sense of that. Just I have a few people that I know would like to speak on the bill.
All right. First, are there any questions for the patron by the committee members?
Yeah, I have a
Okay,
couple.
Collins.
Because this is so currently DMV allows a driver a privilege card, basically a 1 year if you're here, but can you explain the problem that you're trying to solve? Because I understand that immigrants right now can get a driver privilege card.
Yes, sir. I think on the sheet, and I might have to defer to my immigration lawyer, but there are about 6 statuses that are covered to be able to get the driver's permit card. The problem is, and it's a federal government problem, that there are a lot of statuses. I think there are 9 or 10 of them on the sheet.
Where's that piece of paper? It's here.
Yeah, 9 or 10 on that sheet. That if you look down immigration, if you look down these immigration statuses, if you look down these immigration statuses, all these take 4 or 5 years to get through. So I mean, they might be here legally. All these are legal statuses, but they've got to wait 4 or 5 years. And in the meantime, what happens is these people are driving. They're on the road now, and then once they get stopped once, you know, you've got the misdemeanor. They get stopped twice. It's not long before they're deported. They're under legal status, but we're not giving them the ability to drive and get to work. So what's happened, and this bill originally came up to me because I've got farms on the Eastern Shore where the farmer's playing taxi cab driver. He's got 7 trucks sitting there. He's got workers that know how to drive it, but they don't have valid driver's license or driver's privileges cards to get to the field. So what he's having to do is drive 1 truck, take everybody around, drop them off, pick them back up, and all he's doing all day is driving around. He's got the vehicles to use. And I think that can probably be echoed in almost every agricultural community. I think you can look at almost any community where you've got any type of hand laborers. That these people just need. I can't do anything about immigration. I can't do anything about the federal government with their issue. But I feel like that in Virginia we could give these people the ability to drive legally and safely. I mean, and the whole crux of it is we can do it, and it's not going to cost the state anything. We would actually benefit on that side. So with that, you know, I defer to any other questions.
Any other questions by members on the committee? All right. Okay, Delegate Bloxham, you said that you understood that some were prepared to speak. So
Yes,
if
yes.
there's a member of the audience who wants to speak, please step forward and identify yourself.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Alina Kilpatrick. I'm a native Virginian and an immigration lawyer. And I would like to address one of the questions that you had, Delegate Collins. One of the great ironies about the current legislation and what we have now is that if a person is in the process of applying for some benefit such as asylum, they might not get asylum, but they might get another benefit called withholding of removal, which involves slightly different elements than asylum. While they're in that process, trying to get asylum or withholding of removal or relief under the Convention Against Torture, they're allowed to have a driver's license with the use of their work authorization card. There's a code on the work authorization card that the DMV runs. However, when a person is actually granted withholding of removal or relief under the Convention Against Torture, they're no longer eligible to have a driver's license, which is just this strange, weird irony that's currently in the law. I don't know why that is, but it's something that we need to fix, and it's something that this bill will fix. The average amount of time between the time someone crosses the border, southern border, and the time a case is adjudicated in the Arlington Immigration Court is about 4 years. I have hearings set in 2022 for people who crossed 2 years ago. So these people are in line to have their cases heard, and they are allowed to work, and they need to be able to get to work. There are other people, including children who are abused and neglected, who are waiting for visas under the special immigrant juvenile status. There are victims of crime who are waiting for visas under the U visa status. There are victims of human trafficking who are waiting for visas under the T visa status. And they don't get those work authorization cards. T visas do a lot faster, but U's and SIJs can wait 4 to 5 years. They don't even get those work authorization cards that the DMV uses. So they're in line, but because Congress has limited the amount of visas that are available under those statuses each year, they can't do anything except wait. There are other people who entered without inspection who are married to United States citizens or lawful permanent residents, and pursuant to a 2016 regulation change, they're allowed to stay while their process is adjudicated, while those waivers are adjudicated. But still, they're not allowed to have that card that the DMV uses to get a driver's license. This bill fixes that. So there are people who are in line who don't meet the requisite standards who are on this list. And there are people who qualify to get in line, who are doing what they need to do to get in line, who don't qualify pursuant to this list. And this bill fixes that. Is there any other immigration law question that I might be able to answer for anyone?
See, does the committee have any questions for this particular?
If I can just ask a couple.
Okay, Collins.
Thank you because I will tell you that I did some pro bono work for the nonprofit Immigration Law Center, and yeah, it's a convoluted mess, but obviously it started a law. My question is this: I represent a lot of individuals who are in this country on a variety of different standards. One of the things that I have run into are individuals who have forged passports. They show up to the court. It's someone's making these things. What is the mechanism that we have to be able to ensure that it's an actual passport when they come into this country without a visa and without going through documentation?
Well, I looked over the International Civil Aviation Organization document 9303 a little bit last night. There is a huge system in place with these regulations that the United States and other countries have adopted to make sure that these machine-readable travel documents are what they say they are. So a person might be able to give a passport to an employer or to you or me, and we might not be able to tell the difference. But with the appropriate technology, which I'm under the impression that the DMV has, they can swipe a passport and it will come up as or as something that is legitimate. And because we have, it's not the 90s anymore, and these things are digital now. I mean, even Djibouti is a member state, Chad, the Congo, right? So while I do understand that the idea of having a legitimate passport it's a legitimate concern, but I don't think fortunately, we're not in an era of technology where someone has to, look up something on the embassy of Chad to see if this really looks like it is what it says it is. Plus, the penalties for presenting false identification are going to make you both inadmissible and potentially deportable.
Right.
So anything that you're trying.
I've had that case. Right?
Yes, right. So, if you have any Padilla questions, I'm your person. But yeah, so if you need to, it's counterproductive to the immigrant because they are presenting a document that's going to result in their eventual deportation.
All right, any other questions for this?
Thank you very much for
All right.
giving me the time.
Thank you. And I see that Delegate Tran has arrived. It may be helpful, now that we've heard the presentation from Delegate Bloxham, to hear the presentation from Delegate Tran. Delegate Bloxham has given some indication where he believes his bill is different from yours, so it might be helpful if you did the same from your perspective.
Okay.
But please come forward, and then
Thank you.
members of the audience will have a chance to speak to both bills.
Thank you. And good morning. I apologize for being late. I yesterday went home to celebrate my daughter's second birthday. Many of you met her last year, and so I ran into unexpected traffic. And
You don't need to apologize.
so I'm sorry. So good morning. I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you about HB 2025. And there are many parts that are similar to Delegate Bloxham's, and we do differ on two key policy pieces. But I wanted to help set the framework for why I think this bill is really important. When I first approached one member of this committee about HB 2025, the question I was asked was, is it at the crux of the matter, are we really talking about giving somebody who's unauthorized to be in the US authorization? And I think that's certainly one way to look at this question, and we probably differ in our response to that. I think the other way to look at this question is as state legislators, we are responsible for knowing who's in our community and doing our utmost to ensure the safety of all members of our community. So I really look at this from a public safety perspective. There are over 200,000 undocumented immigrants of driving age that are estimated to be living in Virginia. One could say if you don't have a driver's license, you should stay home. But the reality is, these are people who are driving on our roads. They're taking their kids to school, they're going to the grocery store, they're going to worship on Sunday morning, and in many cases, they're going to work. And so, as state legislators, for us, we really need to figure out what to do. Because if we don't grant and authorize these individuals to drive in Virginia, anecdotally, we understand that they're seeking that authorization and that ability from another state. For example, going to Maryland, which has a little bit more lax policies, it's my understanding, to get their driver privilege card. I think we all know what it's like when you go to the grocery store and you get there and you realize as you're paying, you forgot your license at home, right? And for lots of reasons, right? You may have taken it out to make a phone call and left it on the table. You may have left it in a different coat pocket. And then when you drive home, you have a little bit of anxiety, like, when you're pulled over, how do I talk about this? I have this license, but what am I gonna do? And I will confess, in my haste this morning, I left my entire purse at home. So that will be my feeling driving home on 95 today. But people who are undocumented have that anxiety every single day. Driving is such a core part of how we live our lives. And unless you're from Northern Virginia, where you may have access to public transportation or transit, that's just not available in the majority of Virginia. So what do we do to solve that? A driver privilege card, and I came in to hear Delegate Bloxham's remarks, doesn't change or affect immigration policy at the federal level. This is a card that does not confer a change in immigration status, and it truly is not a judgment on your immigration status. It's a recognition that you have passed certain requirements to prove that you are a Virginia, you live in Virginia, you're a Virginia resident, you know the rules of the road, and that you can drive with some authorization. What must you do to get this driver's privilege card? You have to pass the DMV's knowledge, road, and vision tests and comply with Virginia's automobile insurance laws. Had a conversation with the automobile insurance industry rep and assured him that this does not relax any of those requirements that we have for other drivers. So those are the same things that you and I have to do to get a driver's license. You also have to actually prove that you've filed a Virginia income tax return to demonstrate that you've earned income here in Virginia, so you're a resident here. You're somebody who's part of our community. And then lastly, you have to comply with how everybody else in Virginia, this is one of the differences between Delegate Bloxham's bill and mine, of who you are. And I heard some of the questions about how do we ensure I'm trying to think of the word for opposite of fraudulent, but that these are validity and legitimacy of these documents.
It's fine.
So, I was looking at the list that the DMV uses now under Real ID, and they've actually really tightened the requirements and opportunities you can to prove who you are. You have to prove one identity, proves who you are, proof of identity, proof of presence, proof of Virginia residency, and some other things. And so the DMV currently has in its processes already built in the ability to validate our all these different documentations that you can bring forward. Because the DMV doesn't want anybody who is here with authorization to be able to use fraudulent documents either. And as the speaker noted just a second ago, these individuals don't want to risk being here and go through the deportation process by using illegitimate, documents, right? And I think I wanted to lean in, about the conversation. So these requirements were kind of agreed to as part of a 2016 DMV study that was requested at the behest of then Chairman Villanueva, after there were lots of different bills around driver privilege cards. And so that study and the recommendations that came out of it were agreed to by a wide group of very diverse stakeholders, including, the Virginia Farm Bureau, the insurance folks, immigrant advocates, public law enforcement, and others, right? So it was a wide group of folks who agreed that this is kind of the requirements we need. And for me, in my bill, what I propose is using the requirements that the DMV puts forward, because, for example, if you only limit the ability for this community to get a driver privilege cards by using a passport, not all countries will offer their citizens a passport if they're not present. So for example, our understanding is India requires you to come home to India to be able to apply for and obtain a passport. Those individuals that are in those countries most likely won't do that, because then it'll be difficult to return here to their families and their lives here. But in addition, so that means they will probably go to other states to obtain a driver privilege card, which is what they're doing now because we don't offer that. I think it also, I want to note, creates almost like a second tier of undocumented immigrants. Those who can obtain driver privilege cards because of their country requirements, and those that can't. And so that's either going to push people further into the shadows or have other intended consequences. So I want to talk a little bit about the public safety effects that we've seen in the 12 states in the District of Columbia that have already implemented driver privilege cards. So there's clear data that shows that there's a decrease in traffic incidents. Alcohol-related crashes decreased in Mexico and Utah by significant percentages, 32% in New Mexico, 16 in Utah. Traffic fatalities have also decreased. Hit and runs have decreased in California. And also very importantly, the uninsured rates have also decreased in some of these states. And then I wanted to talk lastly about another policy difference between my bill and Delegate Bloxham's is the fee that we would charge for a driver privilege card. So in working through the DMV report recommendations from 2016 and adjusting those recommendations for new estimates in terms of the number of undocumented individuals who are of driving age living in Virginia, I'm proposing a $65 initial fee followed by a $20 when you re-up. Thank you, renewal fee. So that would make this a revenue neutral, a budget neutral proposal starting in year 1. And then by year 4 of implementation, the state has a revenue of about $3.2 million. I think it's important to note that many of the folks who are in this community are working in minimum wage jobs. And so I want to make sure that we have a fee that balances what the state needs to make it budget neutral starting off with implementation, as well as the realities of their lives. In comparison, the current cost to get a driver's license for us in Virginia is just $32. So this is a double that amount, but it doesn't go much further. I think that's it.
Delegate Tran,
Yes,
with
sir.
regard to the fees that you mentioned, do you have an amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes,
Would
thank
you
you.
like
I'd like to move the amendment, I forgot.
Okay, what, is a committee member moving?
I'll move the amendment.
Second.
All right. Please report it.
Mr. Chairman, on line 1647, after the word B, strike 100, insert 65, or strike $100, insert $65. On line 1649, after fee of, strike $50, insert $20.
All right. Now that we got a little bit ahead of ourselves, now that the amendment has been reported, is there a motion to adopt it?
So moved.
And second, okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, and with that amendment, we see some of the principal differences in the bills, I think. Okay, are there questions for the patron?
so I'm clear, I'm reading the code on my phone, so I apologize. So under current law, I'm reading, if you're not a US citizen, you're allowed to apply for a driver's permit if you have a valid unexpired non-immigrant visa, pending or approved application for asylum.
Mhm.
And if someone can
Yep.
give me an idea of that length of time. Entry into the United States in refugee status, pending or approved application for temporary protected status, approved deferred action status, and a pending application for adjustment of status to legal permanent resident status or conditional resident status, may be issued a temporary license. So I have six current statuses where you're not a US citizen, but you can get a temporary license. That's accurate, right?
Yes, I mean, that's in the code.
Is that an accurate summation of my understanding of non-US citizens that can get?
Sure,
Okay.
yes.
All right, great. Follow-up question,
Oh, excuse me, Delegate Miyares.
can I have a follow-up question,
Yeah,
sir?
oh, certainly.
What is preventing anybody from getting an international driver's permit in their home country before they come here? If that has already been covered, I apologize, I was presenting another bill that's already been covered, but what prevents someone now, which I know the United States recognizes them, international driver's permit in their home country before they come here? What prevents that from happening right now?
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Rick Holden, DV Commissioner. An international license is only a translation of that foreign country's license. You are to get a Virginia license once you become a resident. And in this case, some of those folks with an international license would not be able to apply. The delegate did a tremendous job. The fees are gonna be a little bit higher because it's $65 for a 2-year license. These driver privilege cards would only be for 2 years as compared to $32 for a 8-year license. So it's
Thank
more
you.
than,
Yes,
it's
more
more
than
than
double.
twice. And then the renewal again, would be,
Ours is
would
20.
be for a 2-year.
Yeah.
Delegate Miyares.
And maybe the DMV commissioner can answer this or the patron. So under 46.2-208, section 9, on the request of any federal, state, or local government entity, that means this administration can request this information. So is there not concern, given what we're seeing right now, with, let's just say, a very aggressive posture of deportation from this administration, that the federal government can use this as a vehicle? Is that not a concern, Mr. Commissioner? I mean, that's under the Code of Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate, I can answer your question. I'll let the delegate talk about whether it's a concern or not. But I can confirm that our Section 208 does require us to release this type of information to the federal government upon request.
Mr. Chairman, can I answer? I'd like to chime in and just say, my understanding in the 2016 study was the participating stakeholders were unable to come to an agreement to change that requirement currently, Delegate Miyares. And so it remains, but I think what it shows is it underscores the importance of driving for this community, that they would be willing to not just out themselves by having a card, the driver's license, physically the driver's license card visually say, what their status is, implying what their status is, but also running the risk of the federal government coming to ask for this information. So there would be a lot of education amongst immigrant advocates and service providers to say, you really want to make sure that you know kind of the full scope of what this means. You also want to make sure when you are applying for driver privilege card that you're using legitimate documents, right, valid documents, and so that you don't run afoul as you're going through the process. But as I was saying, it really underscores the importance of having this because, I'm gonna have to drive home today. I don't know how public is this, but like drive home today without my license. This is something that people have to do all the time. You know what I mean? This is what somebody has to do all the time. And that fear and that uncertainty when you're driving day in and day out to just do the daily tasks that we've talked about, that having a driver privilege card outweighs this other concern that we're talking about, which is also a very serious one.
All right, before there are any further follow-up questions, I think the
Yeah.
other patron indicated he may.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, and to his point, 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, the year before President Trump was elected, I asked that exact question, and they absolutely agreed with what she said. We are willing to take that chance. And at the time, they were laughing. And the next year I came back, I said, okay, now President Trump isn't elected, and, you know, are you willing to take this chance? Absolutely, they are willing to take this chance, because every day they drive, they're at risk of being stopped. And it starts to cascade down the mountain that they're gonna be deported anyway. I mean, because once you get stopped, and the second time you get stopped, you start a misdemeanor, 2 misdemeanors, 3 misdemeanors, and then you're out of the country anyway. So they are absolutely willing to out themselves. And with my bill, we'll know exactly who they are, what country they are from, and be willing to pay $200 where, you know, she's on the cheaper side of things. I think it's a, there's no reason to subsidize or at cost.
All right. I think there was another question for Delegate Trent.
I was gonna ask, it may not be for the delegate, it's gonna just be first of all, Chairman Adams and I have some ends with some Commonwealth attorneys, so just give us a call.
I don't wanna get to the point where I have
It's
to.
fine, it's all good.
Yeah.
No, you probably don't know the answer to this question, but somebody in the audience might. Do we know, I mean, 99%
Well,
of the.
let's not get into it, we're back.
Well, no, okay, my question is,
But to the delegate, and if she.
I'm gonna ask the delegate if she knows the answer to this question. What is the population of the number of people in Virginia that fall into this very narrow category? Of where they have come in, they are in some process of,
Oh.
obviously we're not talking about someone who's come in here who doesn't have a visa, does not have a passport.
Okay.
Those are not the people we're talking about. We're talking about people that are in some way, shape, or form in the process of their immigration process.
Yep.
And there's a gap here.
Okay.
Right?
So, currently, the limited duration driver license, and I think the commissioner can speak more, but the DMV currently issues about 100,000 of those limited duration driver licenses annually. And if either one of our bills passes, because we have that, proposal, they estimate an additional 6,000, more individuals would apply and receive the limited duration.
Okay, so just be clear, and thank you. I'm glad you have those numbers. So we're talking about 6,000 people who are who are a gap. They've started the process. Then then the federal government drops the ball, okay, and then at some point in time the ball's picked back up again. They're okay. All right, thank you.
All right. Any other questions from members of the committee? All right. Now might be a good time to resume members from the audience who'd like to speak to either of these two. So if you're in that position, please step forward, identify yourself, and proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. My name is Tom Torcio. I serve as Associate Director with the Virginia Catholic Conference. And we're here to express our support for Delegate Bloxham's bill, HB 1843. As we've heard, immigrants need driving privileges to be able to work, go to school, access health care, and to attend worship services with their communities. And those are all very important activities, as we know. And we certainly want to encourage immigrants to present themselves to the government for both public health and safety reasons. And I think those have been expressed here well already. One of the advantages of Delegate Bloxham's bill is that by requiring the filing of a Virginia tax return, proof of insurance, and an unexpired passport as proof of identity, his bill establishes clear-cut criteria for proof of residency. And that certainly is advantageous for all the reasons that were stated by both delegates. And finally, driver registration, as we know, as both delegates made, I think, clear that, this process will help to ensure that and encourage immigrants to comply with our driver certification requirements and our insurance requirements, and those are also public benefits. I thank you for your time and would ask you to respectfully consider supporting Delegate Bloxham's bill, Mr. Chair.
Delegate, very briefly for the respondent, you said proof of residency. Did you need proof of domicile?
Well,
Where they live, or they're actually residents? in
well,
Virginia?
this will establish their location, because they'll have to provide an application to DMV. So we know these people are claiming where they are, and that's a public benefit to know where people are.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Tram Nguyen with the Virginia Majority. We support Delegate Tran's bill. Just to highlight one component of the public safety, because it actually comes out of an academic study versus any right-leaning or left-leaning think tank. The Proceedings of the National Academy of Science issued a report last April, well, actually 2 Aprils ago, April 2017, that focused on the public safety component. And the report was actually titled, Providing Driver's Licenses to Unauthorized Immigrants in California Improves Public Safety. And the most significant finding in that report was around hit and runs. So by providing driving privileges and driver's licenses to folks, the rate of hit and runs actually reduced by 7 to 10%. And we know that this is important because when an at-fault driver, whether they're an immigrant or not, but if you're an at-fault driver and you stay at the scene of the accident, it's more likely that emergency assistance can come because you're there to make a phone call. They know what the situation is. They can move you safely to the side of the road. We know that fatalities after an accident occur within the first 60 minutes. And so it's vital that the emergency assistance can happen as soon and as quickly as possible. Also, when the at-fault driver stays at the scene, then they're taking responsibility. And we know that if you're licensed, you're educated and insured, you can take responsibility, and it helps all of us, especially with our insurance premiums. My staff joke with me all the time because I actually get into an accident like almost every year. I'm never at fault, but I do get into an accident quite often. I switch my cars a lot. And one of these incidents was actually with an uninsured motorist who hit my car, and my car was deemed a total loss, right? And I luckily had enough uninsured motorist protection and high enough that my insurance covered my total loss. But it does affect all of us, and all of our insurance premiums do go up. And so the fact that folks are going to be licensed, educated, and insured has a public safety benefit and an economic benefit for all of us. So we support the bill. Thank you. Oh, and then one more note, just to answer Delegate Miyares, in terms of if there's been a reduction in folks seeking this. We know that in DC and Maryland, even after the Trump election, there has been no drop in immigrants asking for the driver privilege cards, and in fact, there's been a little bit of a steady increase.
All right, thank you.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Margie Del Castillo. I'm here representing the Virginia Coalition for Immigrant Rights, which is a coalition that represents 29 organizations promoting immigrant justice. Many of the people in the room are members of that coalition, and I'm here to share just a couple stories so that everyone doesn't come up and share a story themselves. But one of our activists actually wasn't able to join this morning because she had to drive her brother to a doctor's appointment. She is a DACA recipient and the daughter of undocumented immigrants, and she's the only one in her family who can actually drive legally. Her younger brother has epilepsy and has to go to a medical center in Washington, D.C. When her brother first had a seizure, her parents were unable to be quickly by his side because they were not able to drive legally. No family should have to go through these obstacles to be near their children. I'm a mother. I can't imagine not being able to be by my child if she got sick. A driver's privilege card is access to healthcare, access to education, and at times access to a better income. Another community member has a powerful story. She was in a romantic relationship and her partner became violent towards her. She has 2 children who were young at the time, and she prayed and taught herself how to drive so that she could get away from her abuser. She describes it as a very frightening experience, but compared to living with her abusive partner, it was the only choice she could make. The last story I have to share with you is of a resident of Manassas, Virginia. She's an immigrant from Guatemala and has called Virginia home for more than 20 years. In 2012, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. The impact this had on her family cannot be overstated clearly. She could not transport herself to her doctor's appointments in Charlottesville because she couldn't apply for a driver's license. Her husband, as a result, had to choose between his job or taking his wife to cancer treatment appointments. Being diagnosed with cancer was obviously difficult for her family, but it was made much worse by the fact that she couldn't drive. Today, she's thankfully recovering, but as a mother, she'd like to take her kids to soccer practice, to school, or to church. She'd like to get a job to help her family have a better income and quality of life. She and so many members of our impacted communities ask you to vote yes on HB 2025 Delegate Trans Bill. Thank you for letting me share their stories.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Thomas Bowman, and I represent the Laborers and Employers Cooperation and Education Trust. That's a subdivision of the Laborers International Union of North America, but I represent 300 contractors, so small, medium, and large businesses that work with the unions. We very much support both Delegate Tran and Delegate Bloxham's bill, but we think Delegate Bloxham's bill is a slam dunk. It adds to the revenue of the Commonwealth. It's also the right thing to do for our constituents. And he pointed out that it actually addresses an H-2B farm worker driving loophole problem, where you can get a farm vehicle, and those are often pickup trucks, and you can start driving those around at 12 years old. But what this does is provides a legal and safe avenue to make sure that these people driving on our roads keep my members safe, but also the rest of the Commonwealth safe too. And it solves a problem in rural communities, it solves a problem in urban communities, because we have many members that need to drive to or from the job sites, and they have families too, so they need to take their kids to work or to school, sometimes to the doctors, and enjoy the privileges of living in the United States. They're here legally, and they're present legally. So the Laborers International Union of North America and the Laborers and Employers Cooperation and Education Trust very much support these two bills today.
Thank you, and if you would entertain a question, I
Sure.
have one for you. So with respect to the organization that you represent, those employers, are there current legal prohibitions on the hiring and employment of individuals who would be allowed a privilege card under these proposals?
Yes, so our contractors mostly do E-Verify. So the union itself does not check for green cards necessarily, but what we do is if they are going out to a job site where everybody has to be a citizen or everybody has to be legally present, we make sure that everybody we send them is. As well as there's usually drug-free writers on the contracts as well, so they're tested and they have to pass background checks depending on the job site. So each job site is a little bit different with different requirements, but yes.
So how is it my question was, are there legal impediments to the employment of folks who would be benefited by this privilege card? And you're saying, yes, there are impediments to employing them?
Yeah, yeah. So if they're employable now. They're on job sites now, but these driver privilege cards helps them get there safely.
I'm not sure, Delegate Tran.
Mr. Chairman, I think the way I'm understanding your question is, does receiving a driver privilege card change the employability status vis-a-vis immigration policies now? And
Well,
no?
What I'm really getting at is, you know, the folks who have been sort of identified
In this,
in
yeah.
this, are those people lawfully employed by
Oh.
your employers?
Of course,
now?
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So there's no impediment,
Yeah,
so there is, so
limited duration.
you're saying
Absolutely.
there is no impediment to
Getting a job? Absolutely not.
to the job? Okay, either federal or
Nope,
other state law?
not at all.
All right, that was my question. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, is there anyone else in the audience who'd like to speak to one of these matters? Okay. All right, well, let's take up these bills in the manner in which they were presented. So, House Bill 1843, Delegate Bloxham, he's still here. Delegate Bloxham, any
I would just like to add, or say in conclusion that, if I brought you a bill that said, I'm gonna document everyone in my community, tell you where they live, where they work, and who they are, and what country they came from, I would dare say that my side of the aisle would be jumping up and down, and the other side of the aisle would be yelling that you can't do that. We heard that the feds can go into DMV records. If there's an issue, they can pull all those records. And if I said on the other side of the aisle, I'm gonna give them driver's license, driver's permit cards. We need to be careful how we say that, driver's permit cards. Of course, my side of the aisle has always resisted that. Their side of the aisle has always cheered it. I'm looking at this with my bill as a win-win for everyone. I understand that the elections are coming and it's gonna be, one of the immigrants is gonna be the big issue. That's a federal issue. This is a state issue. We need to solve this problem in our state. Maryland has already done it, much laxer than what I'm proposing. What I'm proposing is the toughest driver's permit card in America. The toughest things you have to do. It'd be very hard to fake, with the new regulations, passports. So I just hope y'all rule favorably on my bill. Yes, sir.
That sort of prompted an additional question for me, because I think you and Delegate Tran both mentioned Maryland, and that there are different standards than what you're proposing.
Yes.
I think that you're proposing, but that are already existing.
Yes.
Is there any data showing the consequence of the incentive that you have for a neighboring state that is, and what kind of burden that may have?
On their state?
Yes.
I don't know about burden. I guess I could respond to the chairman that in the past, I think Washington State was the first to do this, and we would have people leave here, go to Washington State to get a driver's license. That's how much this means to this area. So I know Maryland does it. Maryland's cost is much higher, I think, than ours, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm sorry, sir.
Maryland's cost for their driver's permit card. Okay, I understand that it's much higher. Now, I cannot verify that. But in my mind, this is just a simple verify who's in your community and give them the permission to drive safely.
All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Delegate Delaney.
I would just like the opportunity, I know you've each explained a really great job explaining your bills, but, and maybe this is a question for Delegate Tran, on the difference between the documentation provided. I'd like to give you the opportunity to speak to your bill and the documentation that your bill requires, and explain if there's concern that, that Delegate Bloxham's bill is more stringent. Give you the opportunity to kind of explain what yours requires, and if you have a case for why that would be an adequate level of documentation, just so I can understand the difference in between the two.
Sure. So, and I think I'm gonna ask the commissioner to jump in after I lead off a little bit. If as we're transitioning between the old requirements between, it used to be when you got a driver's license, you have to provide a primary source of identification and a secondary source of identification. And as we're transitioning to using the sources just for real ID, what we would have to do is go and ensure that these sources are definitely things that somebody who's undocumented can also provide, right? Like, so one thing that we would probably add to the list would be a consular ID, which is something that, and is issued by the country or the embassy, but not at the level of a passport. And I think that that's really important to not be as stringent. The DMV already has a process to ensure the validity of the documents that are used to obtain a driver's license. They would use the same strict kind of set of eyes to evaluate any document that somebody who's applying for driver privilege cards brings forward that meets those requirements. But the reason we don't want to just require a passport is, as I said before, not all countries enable somebody who's living in the US currently to get a passport through the embassy in Washington. Further, so many unless you're in Northern Virginia, do you have easy access to the embassy in Washington? If you're in further parts of the Commonwealth, that's that's difficult to get to do that. And so that is just added both logistical barriers and, you know, India, we've learned, does not allow this, and so there probably are other countries where trying to kind of wrap our arms around all the other countries that don't, and it creates, I think, a different tier within the undocumented community.
It's a follow on
Yes.
question. I think if the concern, I could imagine what the concern is that an assumption that a more stringent set of documents would ensure, you know, less fraud and more authenticity. And I think, you know, your bill provides a set of possible documents. Do you feel that there's data to demonstrate that the documents that are in your bill would maybe increase access to more people without there being any effect on the authenticity of that person being able to prove that they are who they are?
Yes, I would stand by that, absolutely, and like I said before, you know, it's not that the DMV is well experienced in the area of checking documentation, because, you know, they wouldn't want us to come in and be able to obtain, you know, a driver's license, a regular driver's license under false pretenses. So they're very well versed in how to check that documentation. I don't know, Mr. Commissioner, if you would want to address kind of your process in place.
Mr. Chairman, Delegate Delaney, first of all, we will sell you a copy of your driver record for $10 so you can drive with us. I will talk with you about that later on. But to answer, first of all, to make one correction, unfortunately, we don't have technology to verify a foreign passport. We do verify U.S. passport through a system called United States Passport Verification System. Part of Real ID, you bring your U.S. passport in, we do scan it, and it's verified. We clearly will work on documents that can be verified and presented to us. One thing that we would respectfully suggest to both bills is some type of requirement that any document that is issued by the foreign country, whether it's a driver's license or a passport or any official document, would need to be translated and verified by the consul or embassy. That certainly, I think, would take care of anyone's concerns. Now, the embassies and consulates won't be very happy that we're sending all of our, all of our customers in there to get that. But if an embassy looks at a passport and in the process of translating it, or looks at a foreign driver's license and is in the process of translating it, I think they will be able to determine whether it is a fraudulent document as part of that. Just a suggestion, but we certainly will work with the community to make sure we have enough documents that are verifiable to be accepted.
All right, let's not get too far afield from procedure. Delegate Delaney, do you have any other?
I mean, I think the heart of what I was trying to get at, I think, is ultimately, and maybe, Commissioner, you can answer this, do you feel that between these two bills, is there a substantial authenticity difference, in your opinion, between the types of documents being required by either of the two bills?
First of all, the administration has no position on the bills, but certainly in working with Delegate Bloxham over the last decade, it seems like, on this issue, I will say that the delegate did sort of take the hardest requirements from every other state and put it in his bill. We think the Delegate Tran's bill also does a good job, but I'm going to leave that up to y'all. Whatever bill passes, we will work to make sure, as those customers come in, that we are able to document their identity.
Thank you.
Delegate Garrett, did you have a question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Delegate Block.
I just want to bring to the, Mr. Chairman, to the committee's attention that in this document, from new passports now, I think in part 3, all passports are going to have to be in Latin type. It'll be American and.
I know I was.
Well, I'm saying that's what I was reading. It's going to be translated into 2 languages. You can see what it looks like here. It is a I don't think DMV might not be able to have verification on them through their scan, but as you can tell, it is going to be extremely hard to
forwards this document.
Okay.
Just add one note though, overall, what the National Immigration Law Center has found, looking across the states that have implemented driver privilege cards, is that the vast majority of people are using their, real IDs, you know, to authenticate who they are when they're applying for them, because they don't wanna run afoul of any of the requirements that if you use opposite of real, if you use, like,
Fake.
thank you, fake IDs, that you
There's a game
might
show
be-
like this.
We should be partners.
Yes, there you go.
But you know, then you run the risk of being deported, and you don't go this far to get this card in order to be deported, right? So I think there's some kind of just real logic that is involved in this as well.
Yeah. Okay, all right, well, let's go back to, House Bill 1843, okay, because we need to take some action, if any, on, these bills in some sort of order. So, 1843 is for the body.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Delegate Carr.
I think I have constituents who are affected by this. I think this would be a win for our Commonwealth, and it would allow our roads to be safer, to know who's here, and with that, I'd like to move to forward the bill.
Second.
Okay, so as amended,
As amended.
there's been a motion to report, and that motion has been seconded.
Mr. Chairman, I would say so.
Delegate shall state it.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we gently lay this bill on the table.
Is there a second?
I'll second that motion if I can speak to it just briefly.
Okay, yes.
I think that the issue with both of these is that we're trying to solve a federal problem. I represent immigrants all the time in the criminal court system. We continue to argue this issue with the courts, and until the federal government is willing to pick up the mantle and fix the problems that they've created, I don't think it's up to us at the state level to solve their problems. So I would second the motion, Your Honor.
Okay, there is a motion and a second to lay the bill on the table. Is there any further discussion by members of the committee? Please open the roll so that we can record it electronically. The motion carries. 4-2. All right, now with respect to House Bill 2025, that bill is before the committee.
Chairman, I'd also make the same motion to table the bill for the same reasons. And gently, I think this is I think we, as a transportation committee, need to reach out to our congressional delegation, let them know that this is an issue that we're dealing with. They need to solve these gaps that have been created in the federal law. And I think once they do, we have a great system in place to give people who are trying to do work and everything else. But for us to try to work around the position, and I'm sorry I didn't ask permission to speak on my motion, but it annoys me that we sitting on courts, we have to solve a lot of the federal gap issues, and I just don't think that's our job.
Second motion. All right, there's a motion that's been seconded by Delegate Guerra.